Welcome, everyone, to the Feminine Outliers podcast, your dose of fun, life advice, and experiences from two African professional women living and working in the Western world. We are your hosts, Cholwe Mandona
and Zelda Wasau.
And we are excited to have you here with us again. So, welcome everyone to our episode of the week, which is Women in Leadership.
Yay.
I know. This is a very good time to be talking about it. I mean, Zell, are you excited about the U.S. elections? As you know. So. I guess so. You have the opportunity. It's actually going to be history in the making, to be fair, because you have the opportunity, even just the fact that you would be voting in this election and have the potential to vote in the first female president, woman of color. So there's a lot of history behind that. So that's very exciting. But today there's obviously more than just talking about women in politics. But it's definitely just a good time to reflect, I think, on where women stand when it comes to leadership, and what our views are on it, especially that we are both women and we're living in the present day of 2024. And yeah, there's a lot that we can discuss. I am a huge fan of leadership. I don't know. I've just been fascinated by it, inspired by it. And it's just something that I really, really enjoy. In fact, fun fact, Zell, you might not even know this yourself, but my favorite movies, like my genre of movies, my favorite movies are autobiographies, like movies movies based on true stories. And a lot of them that I love are based on men and women who, took up courage or were courageous enough to stand for something. So like one of my favorite ones is Lincoln.
Wow.
I know. I love the Lincoln movie. I love the Coco Chanel. Coco Chanel movie. I there are just so many of them that I've watched, and that's my favorite genre. So this topic is dear to me because of what leadership represents, and also because it's part of the reason why we started this podcast, because we decided to take on a vision and a mission. And so, yeah. So exciting stuff. And I don't know, are you a huge fan of those movies?
No. I mean, I like, I'm a history buff, and I will watch some of those autobiographies, but I wouldn't say that the first thing that pops into my mind when it comes to watching a movie. Like, it comes to watching movies, I like action movies, action fantasy type movies, like, the Lord of the Rings kind of vibe. And then I like anime movies, which is not surprising.
Oh yes. That's I firsthand, I know that anime is part of your life, so we're not messing with that at all. Yeah, don't get between Zale and anime. That's just not right. Um, but yeah, no, you mentioned the word history, about being a history fan, and I I'm also a history fan, but specifically when it comes to people,
Mm,
and what people have done, in the world. Um, so there's something about, um, just the human spirit, like the ability for a human being to overcome challenges, and to break barriers, and to just do something beyond what anybody would have ever perceived or could even think.
mm-hmm,
And so when I would read about leaders that have done things in the past, like my mind would always go like, wait, why did they think that? Like why did they decide to do something different, and how did
mm,
they handle criticism or attacks or threats from people, and like I always wondered, like, did they fear for their life? Did they ever like go to bed thinking they're gonna wake up tomorrow? Like were they afraid for their families? um and I just find that very intriguing.
mm.
um so that to me was what captures me about individuals like that. Um so yeah. And one person that comes to my mind is Wangari Mutai. She was an activist, an environmental activist. So why are you laughing?
Oh, I know. Well, I know who you're talking about, but I guess it just amuses me that she comes to mind.
She comes to mind. I mean, like I read about her when I was young, and I was like, man, this woman is a G. Like she just gave me vibes that I was like, man, I'm proud to be African. I'm proud. So, um, but yeah, so that leads me to my next point here, or the topic of the week: women in leadership. Um, and I'm curious. I told you about Wangari Mutai, that she was somebody that I thought, wow, she's awesome. How did you think of women in leadership positions growing up? Was that something that you were exposed to, something you thought about, or I don't know, any thoughts on that?
I think when I think about women in leadership, the first thing that comes to my mind, honestly, is the lack of women in leadership. It's not
Oh.
even women in leadership. Um, just because, I mean, growing up in Kenya, I just saw, at least politically wise, for example, it's very lopsided, mostly males.
Mm,
And I feel like females are not given as much of a voice as the males are. And so in my head, I was just very aware of the fact that it was much harder for women to get leadership roles. So that's what I think about. I think like at that time, I was really following the German Chancellor Angela Merkel,
oh
and
yes,
I found
yeah.
it very cool that she was that she's the leader in Germany and things like that. And I just, especially given their past and the history, because where history buffs come in to play. I
Mm,
know how women, their role was in World War II and stuff like that. So I used to find that interesting, and I think I'd compare it with like Kenya, and I'm like, we're we're nowhere close to being ready for a female president in Kenya. Like
mm,
the men there, it wouldn't stick, it wouldn't sink in. Um, and
Mm.
I think there's a okay. This is where my I apologize. My lack of knowledge comes into play. But there is an African country that has a woman um, leader.
Yeah, that was like Liberia.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And I was like, and
yeah,
I remember thinking that's so inspiring. That's
yeah.
so nice. But again, it's so difficult to achieve. So for me, I was more aware of the fact that it's a difficult thing to achieve. It's
Mm-hmm.
harder to achieve than not than it is for like a male to achieve. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow, it's so funny that you went straight to like the lack of what do you call this? Yeah, like a lack of female leaders. Um I guess it is visible. And I guess for me when I did see if it was a female leader, um I would like gravitate towards like learning about that person. But you're right, especially in politics. Um they're not, I mean, now it's increasing, but I think if you're just a little kid like growing up, it was very clear that a lot of leaders were men, and not women. The president you are referring to is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. um
Mm,
and
okay.
she's the yeah she's the she was the first elected female leader of actually in Africa, I believe, and as a head of state rather. So yeah, yeah. No, I remember actually reading her biography as well, and just being like, wow, that is so cool. Um, but we obviously know that the history for women um, growing, I guess, becoming leaders hasn't been that easy, and it wasn't also non-existent, or at least the way society sort of where society placed women was not in the front, of course, and women were sort of like second-class citizens in a way. So that obviously, I think, did not has not helped to have women in leadership roles. But and that's something I think, I don't know, but I know I did not see that. Well, do you think that you saw that? Because for me, when I was growing up, I there was this sense about what a woman could do or what a woman was supposed to do, like this sense of like it was like women were to cook. So I learned how to
Hmm.
cook. Were to cook, were to clean, but there was just this sense of like this is your role. Um, but thankfully, also it was balanced with sort of like this idea or this messaging, like you can be anything that you want.
Hmm.
So I knew that I could cook and clean, but it wasn't like my end all be it all. So, but I also realized that not everyone had the same familial experience.
Right.
Um, so yeah, like not everybody had it, and there was just this messaging that this is what you're supposed to aspire to. So I don't. I'm trying to decide. I'm trying to think whether, um, in some cases, especially in cases where women are sort of raised in a particular way, already there's a bit of sabotage for them to become leaders. Um,
Hmm.
and so yeah, so that sort of creates this a disadvantage in a way, and so now you become an adult and you're like, well, I'm just going to do this thing that I was told to do and maybe just do enough. I don't know. So but yeah.
Hmm. I mean, for sure, I feel like definitely how you grow up influences a lot of these things. And thinking about it, like I never. I think just like you, I never grew up with a limiting um, factor of, oh, you can't do this. No, it's like you can do whatever you want to do. I think my parents were very supportive in regards to that, but it
Mm,
doesn't change the fact that when you look and you look for women in leadership roles, that
mm-hmm,
it's harder to come by.
mm,
Like you notice it, and you also notice how men respond to women in leadership roles. Like I think that's another thing to consider. And you
mm-hmm,
pick up these things slowly, and it's like it was made to seem unnatural, um, for like a woman to be in a leadership role. And when you see these things, I think as I grew up and I started really recognizing or being more in tune with my surroundings, my environment, my culture, so I started to realize,
mm-hmm,
I mean, people are hung up on this, people are hung up on
mm,
that, and I'm like, really?
mm-hmm,
Because you at home, you're being told by your dad, your mom, you can do whatever you want to do, and then
mm-hmm,
you're going out there, and it's like, and you're like, what?
mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, 100%. Yeah. Um, yeah, no, it's and that's the thing, right? Because I think of my own experiences even when it comes to interacting with men in general. Is I like to, like, even when I shake a man's hand, if just as an introduction, I give them a firm handshake. Because I remember, I think one guy was like, "Wow, that's a firm handshake." I don't know if he didn't expect that I was going to give him a firm handshake, but I was like, what else are you expecting?" Like, I'm going to give you a good handshake.
Well,
Um, and also looking at them in their eye and just being direct and saying, "This is what I think." Um, and I don't know. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, so the there isn't, like, I'm just interacting with a person, like I'm interacting with a male like somebody who's male, who just happens to be male. um and I think I do not follow, what do you call this, the expectations. Yeah, like I do not follow the whatever is considered the norm, um per se. And so that has been a bit of a it's just been interesting to see that response. uh yeah.
like when I think about women in leadership, one of the things that really hops up into my head is the feeling that you have to be masculine, like a or
Mm.
have masculine traits to be a woman in leadership. And that's
Mm.
something that I grapple with and something that annoys me. Um,
Mm.
because I feel like people don't realize that you can be your feminine self but still command a room. But it's like I understand how perception wise people might, I mean, take you a little bit more seriously maybe if you're wearing a suit than if you come in with, I don't know, something more girly.
Mm.
And again, that's their what is it, their own biases that they need to handle and deal with, but unfortunately you still get affected by it. um,
Mhm.
and it's just things like, why, and women in leadership being made to seem more just manly. And it's
Mm.
just, and I feel like it's very annoying, and I feel like we're starting to have more examples of females out there who are you know in their femininity but still being a leader, but they get a lot
Mm.
more backlash, I feel like, than someone who is like a female who's acting more in her masculine energy than in her feminine
Mm.
energy. I just always wonder, why do we have to do it? But again, my motto is you can have it all, kind of thing. Not, I
Mhm.
mean,
Oh,
oh, why can't you try it all? So
yeah, like
if,
yeah.
So in my head, I'm just like, but
uh,
why? Why do you have to push it like that? Why does it have to be like that? Because
yeah.
I feel like that. Because so the difference is like I feel like you have more experience than me personally. Is what I'm thinking in leadership roles.
Mm,
Um, I mean, the only leadership roles I've had really were like being an RA, which you also were an RA, a resident assistant.
yeah.
For people who don't know, that is in
Yeah.
college.
Mm-hmm.
And then now being a physician, ironically, it thrusts me into a leadership role because I'm like the head of the team. Like
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I'm the one who makes the ultimate decision. But it's not
Mm-hmm.
a direct. It's not like a leadership role in the sense that like that you have. I think you'd have a more traditional leadership office type of role. Whereas for me, it's more
Mm.
like a lot of people don't question me because they know that ultimately speaking, it's my license and I'm not who's making the decision and blah blah blah.
I
So
see what
it's
you're
it's kind
saying.
of like a different
It's a different
thing,
kind of
but I still see the
yeah.
differences with
Mm-hmm.
like a male versus woman. Because, for example, as a woman, you tend to get questioned more than a male does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and so it's just things like that. So, like the feminine energy
Mm.
being questioned more. In my head, I'm like, why does this exist? Anyways,
I know. I
that's just
think I
me.
because I was like, why does this have to be there? Like it doesn't make any sense. And I think we have talked about it in previous episodes that the brain, for example, has no gender. So when you're giving your intellectual input, for example, strategic input, it doesn't matter whether you're female or male. Really, it shouldn't matter. But I think there's that shift that society has to move from just respecting women for how they do things and how they operate. So
Mm,
I think the thing is that especially in the corporate world, like in corporate workplaces, there has been this
mhm,
push that even men or just both men and women should should be trained to understand their bias towards looking at a woman in a specific way, because the
ah,
thing about yeah, because if you perceive a woman to not be as competent, for example, maybe even because of the way she's dressed, her look, or whatever, and maybe because she's a woman, there are different skills to this, but what that does, it doesn't matter what she's actually saying, because all of that is going to be filtered into this idea. Like if she's saying something that's intelligent, they know, or and she's very direct, you might think she's aggressive, um and if she says something too
mhm,
softly, you might think she's weak and timid. How can she command a room?
mhm,
um so in a way, it's sort of like saying, let's manage this bias, because it doesn't matter what this woman is saying, and her presence in the room, because I think initially, uh what women were even encouraged to do was show up, be present, show that you are show them who's boss. And so they naturally carry this idea, like, okay, maybe I'm gonna dress like one, like I'm gonna dress like a
mhm,
man, and then I'm gonna talk like one, in terms of I'm gonna suppress my femininity and talk directly, and and just have it basically a different persona. And also, this idea of like, um speak up, say what you want, negotiate, like all of these things, which are good skills to have. But then on the other side, if the individual is still perceiving you as incompetent or not as competent, then it doesn't really matter. And I think that's where this idea of we need to really deal with this bias that we have. Because don't also, because the other thing is that the problem with this um, issue is that because it's systemic,
Mm-hmm.
and since it's systemic, it also means that women do not may not necessarily support women as well, because when you're
Yes. I was, yeah. Mm.
because we're all swimming in the same Kool-Aid. So that's the problem with it.
Really?
Something that's
Sorry. It's such a funny analogy. We're both swimming in the same Kool-Aid. Okay, I'll remember
yeah, no,
that.
no, because we are swimming in like the same Kool-Aid. Because the thing is that women who are independent, speak their minds, are confident, some, some woman can come to, can can say to that woman, "Oh, that's why she's, let's say, not married. Oh, that's why she's like this. That's why she doesn't have her own kids." Or like, you know, it's just like people will then find that reason, and sometimes that could be women who are saying that to that woman, and so it's just a whole system, like you said, like just a shift in society really needs to take place, because let's be frank, a woman is going to be as feminine as she can be if she's given that much respect, and she doesn't need, like, when she says something everybody can listen to her, but if she
Mhm.
doesn't have that respect in the room, I don't know if there's anything that she can do to earn it, you know?
Mm, yeah. I just feel like you you hit a nerve there when you said the women supporting women thing is
Mm,
lacking as
mm-hmm,
well. Like we don't realize we're also part of the problem, and we're
mm-hmm.
just pushing the narrative. Um,
Yes.
yeah, it's an issue because also like women can be. I mean, I'm not saying also. Basically, what you're saying is women can be their own their worst enemies. Um,
Yes.
and that actually
Yes.
works both ways. It works both ways to other women supporting a woman in leadership, and also works with a woman in leadership supporting other women because sometimes women in leadership are horrible. Like, I don't know if you've heard this
Yes.
whole thing about how some of them can be really mean to other women. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't even understand why. But I've heard people say like sometimes they don't like
Yeah.
having female bosses because female
Oh,
bosses
yeah.
tend to just, I don't know, go down. I don't know if they have, I don't know if it's because they have something to prove or what it is, but they just tend to go down real hard and like really like be very, I don't know, like harder to, to deal with, which is ironic because I feel like in general, women tend to be a little bit more compassionate, more in tune with their
Yeah.
emotions. But I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's a part of women that we're told to shut off, kind of
Mm.
when you're in leadership. But
Yeah.
it's a part of leadership that I think distinguishes women from men and can make women really valuable to be in leadership positions because you do need some kind of you have to be somehow in touch with emotions and compassion and feelings like that because if you're
Correct.
not you can make decisions that can be disastrous because no one's up there checking you and being like maybe you should
Mm-hmm.
really think this through. And I think that's such an important thing that women bring to leadership, but that's only if
Mm-hmm.
they're allowed to portray it without people trying to bring them down because they'll be like, oh, you're too emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how people tend to say it versus people actually, or like, so it's either people saying they're too emotional or the woman
Mm-hmm.
actually acting it out and being a horrible boss. So
Yeah.
I was trying to think, I was like, how do I phrase that? I don't even ever phrase it well, but anyways.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. And I think the thing is that when it comes to men, for example, I want to say, let's say in business, with the goal of making a profit, my opinion is that men probably have, I don't know, not all men obviously, but could have an ego, and they want to show that they are winners and they can outsmart or outcompete whatever their competitors or the market. So they look at things from like it's all a numbers game, and so it may lack this sort of emotional impact or consideration of others, because the
Mm.
goal is to quote unquote win. But as you said, women, if a woman was put in the same position, her goal wouldn't just be to make a profit, but she would try and understand, okay, if I decide to make more money, but then this maybe, let's say, other, maybe some of the employees, for them to make more money, employees have to be laid off. And then then you understand the impact of laying off one employee, because it's like they won't be able to feed their family. So maybe a woman would be willing, because she has that emotional aspect, she might be willing to forego the extra profit just so that she can kind of come up with a more reasonable solution that benefits all. So
Mm.
it's not just a numbers game. So I
Mm-hmm.
agree with you that that's where I think women need to sort of bring that emotional side to them. I don't know if there are studies, but I'll be curious to see female CEOs, in terms of their profit numbers versus a male CEO, and see what the differences are. And some people might say, oh, this is why male CEOs are better than female CEOs. Maybe, let's say, because their numbers are higher. But then what is the impact that we're not seeing in the background that maybe a female CEO might consider instead? So,
Mm.
um,
Mm. There
and
must be. Now I'm curious.
yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious to, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that female CEOs can't make money if they think smartly about business decisions. So, but there's just that emotional piece to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, there's just that emotional piece to it. And you're right. I have heard about female, when women are in that leadership role, they are not as kind to fellow women. Um, but going back to the same expression of swimming in the same Kool-Aid, though, it's tough. It's tough, I think, when um because let's say that woman is, let's say, the only woman in the leadership space or in the executive team. Now she has to prove herself, quote unquote, because she's in this system that does not necessarily maybe allow her to just be herself. So then she's forced to prove herself. And
Mm.
then she's has it, as you said, she has to sacrifice herself. And so she's not looking at her other female colleague as like, oh, this could be me. This is more like, okay, I don't know, I'm not gonna treat you kindly because I'm putting all my energy improving myself to the other guys, I guess. Yeah, I don't
Mm.
know where that comes
That's
from, but
scarcity. That's a scarcity mentality. Like you still can have
mm,
energy to be nice to other people. I feel like I don't know. In my opinion, I feel like if there was a woman in leadership in my role, I would try to support her.
yeah.
In the hope that, if I get to that role, other women will try to support me. Like it's like let's be
Mhm.
our best advocates for our own advocates. Let's be the best advocates for
Mhm.
ourselves. So,
Mhm.
just supporting each other because you already know the system is kind of rigged against us. So
Mhm.
just pushing each other up, I think, and I would try to, learn from this woman and things like that, especially if it's something that I'm interested in pursuing.
Mhm.
Um, that's just how I look at it
Yeah.
because I'm like, what I feel like expending negative energy just it takes energy. It takes more. I feel like it takes more energy than just being nice, or like just not going out of your way to be negative or mean
Right.
in a certain way. I feel like that's where some people might lose touch with things like this. Because I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
have had a female boss like that as a resident assistant. Ari, one of my um,
Uh-oh.
one of those, what are they called? I don't know. Whoever our bosses were, she was a bit of an issue. Like none of us really liked her. I think she was worse to the girls than the guys. But but you see, that's why
Yeah.
there's so many like issues. Okay, there's so many benefits, but there's also, I think there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
more issues that are facing women in leadership. You know, because something that just
Yeah.
randomly, it just randomly popped up into my head is two things. Women, you know, a lot of times, and I think you mentioned something like this, if I'm not wrong, you still go home and, you know, you're technically expected to cook, take care of the kids and stuff like that. So it makes it really hard if
Mm-hmm.
you're in leadership to, because you have to, you know, a lot of times you have to spend more time in the company and stuff like that. But when you have kids, it just complicates things and it makes it harder for more women to achieve that leadership role because of the responsibilities they have at home. Whereas guys, for the most part, it's like they're more, it seems more normalized for them to focus more on their career. Whereas for females,
Mm-hmm.
there's like they also have to focus on the family. So it's harder for them to attain that position. In the same realm as that, something that is very, like I've heard someone tell me this, is that, you know, particularly when it comes to young women, because young women
Mm-hmm.
can be leaders. But then some guy told me back home in Kenya, he was like, "But you know the problem is that you're gonna go off and get pregnant." So like it affects,
Um,
like no one is gonna really try to invest much into getting you to be a leader because they're like, "You're just gonna go get pregnant, have to take maternity leave," and I'm just like, huh?
really?
Like
Yeah.
that's why you don't like hiring young women. That's why you don't like training them to be leaders because they're just gonna go and get pregnant. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like, that
Mm.
is such a misogynistic thing to say and think.
Yeah.
But it kind of highlights some of the issues that like women in leadership have when it comes to getting there or being in leadership because you have that family aspect that we have historically. There's more weight that has been put on the woman than the male.
Yeah.
So it
Mm.
just makes it harder.
No. It is. It is. It's so funny when people say that because then I like when yeah, the idea of the don't hire a young woman because she's gonna get pregnant is like, but how did you get here? That's the part that like how would you have been here without the same without the woman bringing you into this world? Um, so that's it's one of those things like okay, yeah. Um, one thing that has come to my mind as you were talking about this is how, like, the women issues are so pervasive, like it's global because
Hmm.
um growing up I thought okay, you're told cook, clean the kitchen, get ready for marriage or something of that nature. And you're like, okay, fine. And then you say, okay, I'm going to move away from this environment, from my upbringing and go to the US and come to the US and just somehow things are going to be different because there's obviously like this idea that okay, I'm now free to do whatever I want. And I think I would say yes. I don't necessarily have to cook and clean if I didn't want to. But then also the US can present its own challenges. Like who's gonna clean for you then? Unless you're gonna like who's gonna cook for you? So it's like okay, that's a little bit different. Um, but then there's that thing again of as you said, you move to a new location and then you're told your maternity leave, for example. I think if I'm not mistaken, in the US, employers are not necessarily they don't necessarily have to give you maternity leave, or it's I can't remember the
I
amount of
think they
time.
have to, but I think it's just less, like three
It's
weeks
just
or
less,
something.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's that as well, right? So then it's like I have quote unquote freedom, but then now I have to make a decision and carefully plan about having a child. And so it's that thing again of where like we're not really free whichever location you're in, because you still have to navigate your life carefully to achieve the goals that you may have, and also just be a woman. Like it almost takes this strategic planning. And so that's one of the things I found out is that
Mm.
women, I mean, yeah, it's the issues are just morphed into something as you move from the African context to the Western world context. Um, and I believe even in the Western world context, women are still probably the ones nurturers looking after the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yes, you may have a little bit more freedom if you are partnered up and you can make a decision that you can go back to work and your partner stays at home. But and that's slowly coming around because I know there's now paternity leave and things like that. So um but yeah, our environment for some reason our world wasn't did not necessarily set it up for women to thrive uh, as they are, freely as they are, to be fair.
Clearly. And I can go on a rant on this.
Uh oh.
But I'll leave it to the next episode. I'll leave it to the next. Because I can go. You know when I start my rants, how they go.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. I mean, maybe we should leave our audience with, um, I don't know, like we should leave our audience on a positive note, because yeah, like I just primed you for a rant and then you're like, okay, let me not start. Yeah. Which I get it. Um, um, I mean, one thing that comes to my mind with women in leadership is first of all, shout out to all the women who are in leadership, women leaders. And I think one of the things that I didn't define right from the beginning is what is leadership. It seems like such a big word, but I define it as simply uh, one's ability to influence others or to um, pursue a vision and to manifest it. So basically, leading something or people to a higher, I want to say, to a better place, to a higher state of value. So um and shout out to all those women leaders, especially in a society that was not designed originally with us in mind as leaders. And so it's just sort of being followers and not necessarily leading. Um, and I think this episode opens us up to thinking, okay, this is where we started from, and maybe in the next episodes following this, we can keep talking about some of the other issues, um, but also just talk about what we can do and how we can promote each other as women, for us to just be better versions of ourselves. But yeah, I think that's my first. Anything you want to add, Zell?
nope.
No. I can see you're like staying calm. You're being like, I can see you're just like, okay,
Yeah,
I'm about, I'm about to get on my rant. I'm
that's
about to
why
get on
I'm
my
trying not
rant.
to go on my rant because I was just like,
Oh, that.
I'm like, don't say it, don't say it.
Don't say okay. Yeah, I can tell. I can tell. No, yeah, no. Save that for the next episode on this. But I thought we get started because a lot of exciting stuff is happening US elections are coming up, so a good time to just sort of introduce this topic and share our initial thoughts. But yeah, don't forget to tune in to our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. So you don't necessarily have to listen to us just on the podcast platforms. YouTube, even though we are not showing our videos at the moment, but you can still listen to us and share this with friends and family. And for anybody that you think might enjoy the content that we produce, we really appreciate our consistent listeners. We love you and thank you for listening to us. And also join our Instagram page as well, the Feminine Outliers, and also write to us and give us your feedback and ideas, whatever is on your mind and you think would benefit us and the rest of our community. And you can do that at the feminineoutliers@gmail.com. So until next time, have fun, live large, and don't be afraid to be